All right, so this week we're reading about the Enlightenment on chapter 17. Hopefully you've all had an opportunity to at least get the book and that you'll be sitting down to read it this week. Some themes that I want to talk about to make you aware before the reading is really what the Enlightenment is. Any of you who took my course, the 101 course, will know that we talked about Rousseau and some of the political philosophers moving into the Enlightenment. And so some of this should be a little bit of a review for you all. However, for those of you who took Dr. Tremaine's class, may not have gotten all of this. And so this Enlightenment period really is a transition between the two courses. So hopefully you'll understand that as you read through it. Really what I want you to understand is that the Enlightenment took place really as major changes in or led to modern changes in Europe and Western thought. A few of those things is that it applied to reason and thought. They applied principles of science to social reforms. The idea was that passion and feelings were significant parts of human nature. And so they really led to those things. The Enlightenment really looked at passion, feelings, and what our human nature was that we should be following those things in the Enlightenment rather than doing good deeds because God told us to. Okay, they opposed the establishment of churches, which I think is an interesting thought as we look at the Enlightenment period. They're really looking towards Newton and some of the scientific philosophers of the time and taking those ideas and putting them into social reforms, which I think is an interesting thought. And as you read through, I want you to make sure that you're looking at some of those ideas. This brought about the idea of reasonable moderation to their social lives. And so moderate in all things, that's an idea that comes out of this time period. One of the things that I hope that you understand as you read through is that most of the people who are taking part in the Enlightenment are the aristocracy. They're the upper crust of society at this time. The people who are poor and at the bottom really could care less about the Enlightenment, about art, about music that comes out of this time period. They're still at the bottom and just trying to sustain life through working long hours. Children are working long hours. You've got a husband and wife that are probably both working during this time period, and that makes it difficult for them to be able to take part in some of these social reforms that are coming about. However, the aristocracy is looking to the poor and saying, we really should be trying to find ways that we can be more passionate, we can show more feeling in some of the reforms that we pass legislatively so that these people at the bottom can take part in some of these other things. However, that doesn't really trickle down, as we see in a lot of times in history, that the very poor at the bottom don't really get a chance to rise above their station. Okay. Because of the reasonable moderation, it really led to several different things. Religious freedom, or religious toleration rather. Social reforms came out of this time period that we see. They really looked, a lot of philosophers looked to this idea of maximizing human production or human productivity while maximizing happiness. That to me is an interesting idea, that as people work, that they're going to find a way to be happier. You may not see that, or maybe you do. I know that a lot of Christians today look to this idea of the harder I work, the happier I will be. And I want you to understand that some of that comes out of the Enlightenment period, of being able to look at it and say, well, if I'm more productive and if I work harder, I can find a way to be happy, and maybe not necessarily just in God's eyes, but in my own. It makes me feel good, and I want to be that way. We see a lot of that today in the conservative movement on the right, where the idea of taking away entitlement programs, and that these people would be happier if they had a job and they were working hard and finding ways to sustain life. So some of those ideas come out of the Enlightenment, and we need to be able to see those connections. One of the great dissenters, and the class, those of you who were in my 101 class will know that obviously I'm going to talk about Rousseau, but one of the great dissenters was Rousseau. Rousseau believed that we shouldn't be doing this, creating social reform for human happiness, but really we should be doing it out of virtue. We should want to do it. We should want to do it because we love our fellow man, and because the community is where we should be lending all of our time and talents to, is building a greater society and a greater community, which is why I love Rousseau. I think that Rousseau is a great political philosopher of the time, somebody that we should all look to. So if in writing your responses this week, if you found a way to institute or incorporate Rousseau into your discussion posts or into your assignment, I'm not saying you'd get a better grade, but I would at least enjoy reading those things of what you think about Rousseau. Lastly, let's just to get across the last piece of this, I think that you all should understand that one of the reasons that we talk about the Enlightenment period, although it's fascinating, but it has a direct effect on you as American citizens. And one of those ways is that U.S. political figures at the time really looked to the Enlightenment and political philosophers as a way to frame our Constitution, as a way to look at some of the things that they were doing, and took a lot of that information and put it into our political system. So we get a lot of these ideals of happiness, the pursuit of happiness, that all comes out of the Enlightenment, and that we need to really give credit to the Enlightenment for, that we wouldn't have some of those things without the Enlightenment period. And so I hope that you see that connection. As you read this week's chapter, please look at those, try to figure the things out in the book that you are able to make a connection with, that you're able to see that linear connection between the Enlightenment and maybe some way that it affects your life today. Now, I'm not saying that you necessarily need to bring that up. However, in your discussion posts with your fellow students or your classmates, if you can make that connection and make that argument using examples from the book, you're going to be better off, and it's going to help you to understand why this historical era is important or significant at this time. The Enlightenment, in the end, offered great social reforms for people. And one of the things that I want to get across to you is that they're looking to people rather than to God and the afterlife. That's a big change from where we've come from, always looking to, we need to do this because God told us to. We need to do this because I'm fearful of God. We need to do this because I need to secure my place in the afterlife. This really, the Enlightenment gets away from that with scientific reforms or scientific ideas that lead to reform, and really shows you that what we should be looking towards, or what they should be looking towards, is human happiness, is human nature, and looking at people rather than God. This is going to lend itself to the idea of God on earth and God as people who are around us, or that we need to be helping those people around us. Look for those themes this week in the reading. Reasonable moderation, social reforms, passion and feelings above spiritual guidance. Okay, those are going to be pivotal themes this week as you read and then as you prepare. Remember Rousseau. There's a brief section on Rousseau and his thinking, and he's going to be the great dissenter of all these people that we should be. He agrees with them. However, it's not for human happiness. Rather, it's for virtue. We should be doing it because we want to, because we love people, because we want to make our society a better place. And this is going to be a fight that we're having today, right, between Republicans and Democrats. It's something that continues on, whether we're doing something because we have to, or whether we're doing something out of the greater good. And so take a look at that. Do the reading this week. I hope that you can find these themes, and that as we talk about it further throughout this semester, that you're able to take some of the things that you learned from the Enlightenment and kind of spread it out and see that these themes continue to weave their way through the rest of the semester. Happy reading. We'll see you next week.